let's talk a little bit about object-oriented programming more formally. All right. So here's a couple of things that have led programmers to this idea of object-oriented programming. So often programmers try to model the world. So we're writing code, all right, in a machine, but the code in the machine is trying to model something in the real world, okay? The world consists of things or objects. Okay, so here's some examples of things or objects. They're just random. We could have a car, or a dog, we just saw a dog, or a soda machine, or a deck of cards, or a person. All right? So one of the observations that programmers have had about these things or objects is that there's sort of two parts to trying to model a thing or an object. All right? There is state information or data associated with the object. And so, for example, like a car, it might be like how fast can the car go, or what color is the car. For a dog, we just saw it's the barking noise that a dog makes, or the dog's weight. For a soda machine, it could be something like, you know, how many cans of Coca-Cola are in the soda machine, how much change is in the soda machine. All right, so that's state or data associated with an object. So that's one thing. And we call those, in Java, we call that formally a member. All right, so the barking noise that a dog makes is considered the member of an object. The weight of the dog is considered a member of the object. All right, so there's another part as well, though. These are behavior. Whoops, let's spell behavior correctly there. This is behavior. Or action. And these are things that you can do with an object. You can either do it with the object, make the object do something, or you can do something to the object. So doing something with the object would be an example would be having the dog bark. So you're saying, hey, Belle, I want you to bark. Okay, so that's a behavior or an action associated with an object. Doing something to an object would be something like, hey, let's change the color of the car. The car is red, but we're going to paint it, and we're going to paint it green. I happen to like green. All right, soda machine. Let's get a can of soda, get a can of Coca-Cola, maybe buy a can of Coca-Cola. Deck of cards, let's deal a hand. Person, let's say hello to the person, okay? So these are all things that can be done to an object, right? So we call those methods. So you're already familiar with those. So you invoke methods on an object to get it to do something or to do something to the object itself. So the combination of members, data associated with an object, and methods, things that you can do to or with an object, that's a really powerful combination for modeling things that are in the real world, but also for taking code that other people have written and using it in your own code to do stuff. All right, so what I wanted to do is go through a few examples of the kinds of things that you might, the kinds of objects you might encounter in the world, in the world of programming. all right? I got a huge list here I'm going through. There's so many. I'm not going to go through all of them, but maybe we can start out with something really straightforward, okay? How about this? So this is what we call like object number one, or a sample object. So we'll call this object a rectangle. All right. So this would be like in Java, we would say like the type of the object is a rectangle. Or actually, more formally, we would say this is the type of the object, but more formally, we call this the class of the object. All right. So there's a distinction in Java between basic types like integers, doubles, and characters, booleans, and things that are object-oriented. All right, an integer is not object-oriented. At least the basic integer isn't. There's not much you can do with it to an integer variable I, except use it in expressions. So a rectangle, though, we could think about what's the kind of data that we want to store with a rectangle, and then also what are things that we'd want to be able to do to or with a rectangle. So when you're trying to model an object, what you want to do is think about those two things. What's the data that I'm going to store for every time I create a rectangle? What are the things that are going to make one rectangle different from another? What's that data that I'm going to have to store? And then what are kind of interesting things I could do to or with a rectangle? All right, so pretty obvious, I think, one piece of data that we'd have. So this is one piece of data that we'd have is, so we call this data or members of this class. It's going to be length and width, right? So this might be our length, and this is our width. So every time I create a rectangle, I'm going to have a length and a width associated with it. And then what are some, maybe we could think of some other things that we could do, but for example, that maybe the rectangle has a color. Maybe the rectangle has a location. Maybe the rectangle is a filled rectangle versus a not filled rectangle. So those are all additional pieces of data that could be associated with the rectangle. But I think let's just leave it, keep it simple, and we'll have just two members, length and width. Now you might be thinking, well, wait a second, Bob, what about area and perimeter? Those are definitely pieces of data that can be associated with the rectangle, but those are things that we could do to or with the rectangle. Once we're given the length and the width, we can calculate the area and perimeter. And so we're going to defer those two and those two pieces of information and say those are things we can do with a rectangle, okay? So let's write down the methods. So these are the behaviors or actions that we can do with a rectangle. So one thing is we can say get area. Given the length and width, we can get the area. We can also say get perimeter. And it's very common with objects to also, or with classes, to also have things that allow you to manipulate the, that seems kind of negative, so let's do this. Things that allow you to manipulate the members, both ask what the value of the members are and also change the value of the method. So we call these getters and setters. And we're going to have get length. That'll give us the length. Set length. Get perimeter. And set perimeter. Oh, sorry, not perimeter. Sorry about that. You wouldn't get perimeter. You're just going to calculate that based on the length and the width. So we're going to have get width and set width. All right, so that's a pretty good description of this rectangle type, or more formally we call it a rectangle class. So we have some data, the length and the width, and then we have some things that we can do with the data. We can get the area, we can get the perimeter, we can get the length, set the length, get the width, and set the width. So there you go. There's an example of one type that is very useful to model using object-oriented programming. So let's do something that's a little bit derivative of this and that we actually have some code for. And we'll be able to write some, we'll go from this sketch to writing something more formally in Java. All right, so we have the circle. All right, we're going to think about a circle. So what are the things that are interesting about a circle? And of course, graphically, I'm going to give you some hints. So we want to think about what is the useful information that a circle has. All right. So what's the data associated with a circle? The data are members associated with the circle. So the data or members, what is that? Well, for a circle, I would say, one thing that we probably need to have for a circle is this, right? The radius. That's a piece of data. And the other thing we probably need to have for the circle is this right here. What is the center of the circle? What is the location of the center of the circle? So center X and center Y. And again, we could have other pieces of information here. We could say, hey, what is the color of the circle? And is the circle flashing? And what is the color of the border of the circle? What is the color of the inside of the circle? So we could have all that kind of information, but let's just keep things simple for right now and just say, this is the basic information that a circle needs. All right, now, once we have that data in members, we can think about what are things that we could do to or with a circle. So that is the behavior or methods that are associated with the circle. All right, so an easy kill, or not an easy kill, but an easy set of things that you can do with a circle are you can get and set members. All right, so there's a member for radius, there's a member for the X value, there's a member for the Y value. So that means we can get set radius, get set X, and get set Y. So I'll just write those down. Get set radius. We can get set X. We can get set Y. And what are some other, so those are the getters and setters. That's useful. And then the other thing that we might want to be able to do is we want to, well, what are other things you can compute in a circle? Maybe get perimeter. Get diameter. And maybe get area. These are all things that we can compute based on the radius. Okay? Now, so we have now another idea, right? We have this circle type, or circle class more formally, and we have the members, the data that's associated with a circle type. And we've got things that we can do with the circle type. So I think it would make sense to maybe, let's go onto Codio and see if we can build something, build a little bit of code using the circle type and the description that we have here of our circle type. All right, so we're gonna go over here, go to Codio, and we'll log in. We'll go to that object-oriented programming section under lecture notes and projects. So you've got a link to this, but I'll try to link the code here as well. I'll try to remember to do that. So we're gonna go to object-oriented programming, and I'm gonna do a file, new file, and I'm gonna say working with circles, okay, .java. And we'll just copy the code from working with dogs over there. But of course, we're not gonna have dogs in here, we're gonna have circles. Working with circles. All right, so, okay. So, now, we just sort of repeat the process that we did with the dog. We have to go to the course website, and we're gonna scroll down here and go to the circle class, and we're gonna download that. Right-click, save link as, circle. I think I've saved it a bunch of times on my download folder, but we'll correct it when we upload. So it says circle 3, but we'll and then go to Codio, and then we're gonna say file, upload file, and we're gonna do browse for files in the downloads directory. And we're gonna look, there's circle. I'll just rename it, and we'll upload that. And it's called circle 3, but we're going to rename it to circle. Okay. We're going to rename this as circle.java. And so now we have the code that someone else, actually I wrote, but someone else wrote, but we can use that to do work. All right, so let's go back to our notes here. Close that. So it looks like we've got a radius, a center X, and a center Y. Now the question is, if we wanted to create a circle, like I can say this, circle, that's my type or class, C equals new circle. Now typically when you do a new to create an object, an instance of the circle class, there's some arguments that you pass into this initialization routine. Actually, this initialization routine has a special name. It's called the constructor because it's constructing an object out of the circle class. We'll talk about the difference between objects and classes in a little bit. But basically, when you create a new circle, you can pass arguments into the creation method that says what you want, what kind of circle you want. Now, I don't remember exactly what that would be. So I'm going to go look at the documentation here for the circle class. And the circle class documentation looks really similar to what I was writing over here. It lists the data members and the behavior method / methods that you can invoke on a circle. All right. So we have a get X and a set X, a get Y and a set Y. So that's going to set our center position. We have a get radius and a set radius. We also have a get area and a get, oh, I put perimeter, but it should have said circumference. Okay, and so we have an example here of creating a circle. Circle X equals new circle 2023. So it looks like the X position is the first position in the initialization method is the X value of the center. The second position is the Y value. And the third position is the radius of the circle. All right? So this is really helpful information about how you would use a circle. So I'm going to go back to my code here and say, all right, well, I'd like to create a circle. And I'm going to say, I'd like to have it at, let's say, we'll center it at 0, 0. And we'll give it a radius of 100. So that's where the circle is. Now, are we drawing the circle? No. But in our mind, we can say, in the XY coordinate system, this circle is centered, its radius is centered at position 0, 0. I'm going to go back over here and draw what I just did. So this is my my y-axis. This is my x-axis. And this is 100. This is 100. This is minus 100. And this is minus 100. And what I just did is I created a new circle that has a radius of 100. So it's going to touch all those positions. Not completely accurate there, but it's going to touch all those positions, and it's going to be centered at position 0, 0. So virtually, that's what I just did. I just created a circle that has that location. Now I can get information about the circle. For example, maybe I'd like to print out the diameter. So system.out.println. Is that one of the things I can do here? No. I can print the area though. Okay. So area of circle is, and then I'm going to say C. That's really important because the object I created when I did this initialization method, I created a special circle that has a radius or an area that's calculated by getArea. Now, just to help you understand, I created one circle here, but I can create a second circle. Create that circle B, and maybe I'll have that at position 100, 100, but I'll make that with a radius of 10. So I now have a second, maybe CD. We'll call that D. All right, so let's go back to the picture here. I just created another circle. At position 10, at position 0, 0, and that circle has a radius of 10. So this is circle C, and this is circle D. So I've created two different circles. And that's really important to understand. They both have the type of circle, but C and D are different circles for sure. Area of circle C is C.getArea, and then we'll do a system out print line for area of circle D. We should see different areas. Okay. All right, clean up my code a little bit, and let's compile this and see what happens. Oh, CD object-oriented programming. All right, so area of circle C is 3.14159, blah, blah, blah. And then area of circle D is 3.1415926. Okay. Yeah, pi times r squared, right? Pi is 3.14159, and r squared here, well, D, it's 10. 10 squared is 100, so it would make sense that the area of circle through D looks a lot like pi, and the area of circle C looks a lot like pi as well. It's just we moved the digits, the decimal point over to the right a little bit. Well, I hope that makes sense. So we went from this very general idea of what a circle was and thought about its data and members, its behavior and methods, and then we actually wrote some code that created two circles and used that. Okay. Why don't we try, well, we'll try another example in a second.